On the morning of August 7th, 1944, at approximately 2:30 a.m., Hauptsturmführer Otto Weidinger crouched behind the turret of a Panther tank, advancing through the pre-dawn darkness toward Mortain, France, watching American positions on the ridges ahead that his intelligence reports assured him were held by a single undermanned infantry division. At 31 years old, he was a veteran SS officer with the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, experienced in the brutal combat of the Eastern Front, facing what appeared to be a routine breakthrough operation against defenders his commanders believed could not possibly stop 4 elite panzer divisions. Adolf Hitler himself had ordered this attack, Operation Lüttich, to drive west to Avranches and cut American forces in two. The pre-dawn fog provided perfect cover for the assault, and Weidinger's regiment had already overrun one American roadblock with minimal resistance. His commanders had calculated the mathematics of the attack with Prussian precision. 4 panzer divisions with roughly 300 tanks against a single American infantry division that had just arrived in the sector 2 days earlier. The Americans could not have properly prepared defensive positions, they would not have adequate artillery support coordinated, and, most critically, German intelligence insisted that American infantry squads, while equipped with semi-automatic rifles, could not generate sufficient firepower to stop massed armor supported by veteran SS panzergrenadiers who had shattered Soviet armies across 1,000 miles of Russian steppe. When Weidinger's companies had trained for this operation at assembly areas east of Mortain, the tactical briefings emphasized American infantry limitations. Yes, the Americans possessed the M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle, a weapon German ordnance officers acknowledged was superior to the Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifles carried by Wehrmacht infantry. But German doctrine had evolved to counter American firepower advantages through the use of concentrated machine gun fire from the MG-34 and MG-42, weapons that delivered 1,200 rounds per minute and formed the lethal core of every German infantry squad. American squads, built around individual riflemen with semi-automatic weapons, were considered vulnerable to the concentrated automatic fire that German machine gun teams could deliver. The tactical equation seemed straightforward to German planners. And then the fog lifted, and Weidinger discovered that arithmetic in combat operates by different rules than arithmetic in staff briefings. The Americans defending Mortain were from the 30th Infantry Division, a National Guard unit recruited primarily from North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, informally known as Old Hickory in honor of President Andrew Jackson. The division had landed at Omaha Beach on June 10, 1944, and had been fighting continuously through the Normandy hedgerows for nearly 2 months. These were not fresh troops deploying into combat for the first time. They were experienced infantry who had learned through 58 days of continuous operations exactly how to employ their weapons for maximum effectiveness. And those weapons represented a revolution in infantry firepower that German tactical doctrine had not adequately accounted for. The standard American infantry squad in August 1944 consisted of 12 men organized into a rifle squad, a squad leader, typically a staff sergeant, an assistant squad leader, 1 automatic rifleman armed with a Browning automatic rifle, an assistant automatic rifleman who carried extra ammunition for the bar, and 8 riflemen armed with M1 Garands. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The firepower calculation that German intelligence officers had performed was technically correct, but catastrophically incomplete. They had calculated that each American rifleman with an M1 Garand could fire approximately 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute, compared to 15 to 20 aimed shots per minute for a German rifleman with a Kar 98K bolt-action rifle. This represented a 2-to-1 or even 3-to-1 advantage in individual rifle fire. German analysts had noted this disparity in their reports, but had concluded it was offset by German advantages in machine gun firepower and tactical training. What the German calculations failed to account for was the cumulative effect of that individual rifle advantage across an entire squad operating in coordinated fire. 8 M1 Garands, each firing 40 to 50 rounds per minute, generated 320 to 400 rounds of semi-automatic fire per minute from the rifle element alone, all firing the powerful 30-06 Springfield cartridge that could penetrate cover and body armor at ranges exceeding 500 yards. This was before accounting for the Browning automatic rifle. The bar, officially designated the M1918A2, fired the same 30-06 ammunition as the M1 Garand, but delivered it in automatic fire from a 20-round magazine. The M1918A2 had been modified from earlier bar models to optimize it for sustained automatic fire in the squad support role. It featured a selector switch that allowed the gunner to choose between two rates of automatic fire, 300 rounds per minute or 450 rounds per minute. In practice, bar gunners were trained to fire in short, controlled bursts of 3 to 5 rounds to conserve ammunition and prevent barrel overheating, which reduced the practical sustained rate of fire to approximately 75 rounds per minute. But 75 rounds per minute of 30-06 ammunition delivered in automatic fire was devastating at the ranges where most infantry combat occurred, typically between 100 and 300 yards. When the BIR's sustained fire rate was added to the cumulative fire from 8 M1 Garands, a single American infantry squad could theoretically deliver 400 to 475 rounds per minute of aimed fire. In practice, accounting for the need to reload, observe targets, and coordinate fire, the practical sustained rate was closer to 240 rounds per minute. That was the number that mattered. 240 rounds per minute per squad. To understand why this number was revolutionary, consider the firepower comparison with German infantry. A German infantry squad built around the MG-42 machine gun could deliver extraordinary rates of cyclic fire from that single weapon, 1,200 rounds per minute. But that was cyclic rate, the mechanical rate at which the weapon could fire if ammunition was fed continuously. In combat, practical sustained rates were far lower due to the need to change barrels to prevent overheating, reload ammunition belts, and reposition the weapon. A well-trained MG-42 crew could maintain approximately 200 rounds per minute sustained fire. The remaining members of the German squad, typically 8 riflemen with Kar 98K bolt-action rifles, could contribute approximately 120 to 160 rounds per minute combined. This gave a German squad a total practical sustained firepower of roughly 320 to 360 rounds per minute, with the vast majority coming from a single weapon system that required a 3-man crew to operate effectively. The American approach distributed firepower across the entire squad. Instead of concentrating lethal capability in a single machine gun, the M1 Garand allowed every rifleman to contribute significant firepower independently. This created tactical flexibility that German squads lacked. If the German machine gun was knocked out or suppressed, the squad's firepower dropped catastrophically. If an American BR gunner was killed or wounded, the 8 riflemen could continue to deliver substantial fire. More importantly, the distributed firepower model allowed American squads to maintain fire while maneuvering. German tactical doctrine emphasized the grouper system, in which the machine gun team provided suppression while riflemen moved. But American fire and maneuver tactics allowed the squad to split into 2 or even 3 elements, each capable of delivering meaningful suppression fire with their M1 Garands while other elements advanced. This was the tactical reality that confronted Otto Weidinger and the 2nd SS Panzer Division when they attacked at Mortain in the early morning hours of August 7th. The fog that had provided cover for their advance began to lift around 6 a.m., revealing American positions on the high ground east of town. Weidinger's companies had successfully captured Mortain itself in the initial assault, infiltrating through American lines in the darkness and overrunning the command post of the 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment. But approximately 700 men from that battalion had withdrawn to Hill 314, the dominant terrain feature overlooking Mortain, and had established a defensive perimeter. The Germans immediately recognized that Hill 314 had to be taken. From that position, American forward observers could direct artillery fire on the entire German line of advance. As long as American forces held the hill, the drive toward Avranches would be compromised. The 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division was tasked with reducing the American position, while other elements of Das Reich continued the westward push. The attack began with a preparatory barrage of German artillery and mortar fire that crashed down on the American positions throughout the morning of August 7th. Then SS panzergrenadiers began their assault up the slopes of Hill 314, expecting to overwhelm the isolated American defenders through superior numbers and aggressive tactics that had worked against Soviet and Allied forces throughout the war. They discovered immediately that something was different about these Americans. The volume of fire coming from the American positions was far heavier than SS commanders had anticipated for a surrounded battalion that should have been running low on ammunition. But the defenders of Hill 314 had been resupplied during the night, and their squad leaders had carefully positioned their men to maximize fields of fire. When German infantry attempted to close within assault range, they were met with continuous semi-automatic rifle fire from multiple directions simultaneously. Every American rifleman could fire as fast as he could pull the trigger and acquire targets, and with 8-round clips in their M1 Garands, they could maintain fire for extended periods before reloading. The sound was distinctive and continuous, nothing like the methodical crack-crack-crack of bolt-action rifles that German troops were accustomed to facing. Captain Reynold Erickson commanded the American defensive position on Hill 314. At 24 years old, he was a peacetime Iowa farmer commanding a battalion's worth of troops who had been trained for exactly this kind of fight. Erickson understood that his isolated position would fall eventually if the Germans could mass sufficient force against it, but his mission was not to hold forever. His mission was to delay the German advance long enough for American reinforcements to arrive and for Allied air power to engage the exposed German armor columns. To accomplish that, his squads needed to inflict maximum casualties on every German assault to force the attackers to pause, regroup, and attempt new approaches. The M1 Garand was perfect for this mission. When SS troops attempted to rush American positions, the defenders could engage multiple targets rapidly without the delay of working bolt-action mechanisms. When Germans tried to suppress American positions with machine gun fire, the distributed firepower of multiple M1 Garands allowed Americans to continue firing from alternate positions while others took cover. The BR provided additional suppression fire that forced German infantry to ground, preventing them from achieving the momentum necessary for a successful assault. Throughout August 7th, the Germans launched repeated attacks against Hill 314, each one broken up by the weight of American firepower before the assault troops could close to grenade range. SS officers who had led successful attacks against Soviet positions found themselves unable to get their men within effective range of the American defenders. The volume of incoming fire was simply too heavy to cross the open ground between the German jump-off positions and the American perimeter. By midday, Allied fighter bombers had arrived over the battlefield, exploiting the clear weather that had burned off the morning fog. RAF Typhoon fighter bombers armed with rockets devastated German armor columns that were exposed in the open terrain around Mortain. P-47 Thunderbolts from the U.S. 9th Air Force joined the attack, strafing German positions and forcing Panzer crews to button up their tanks or abandon them entirely. The German offensive, which had begun with such confidence in the pre-dawn darkness, had stalled completely by nightfall on August 7th. The tactical calculus had proven wrong. 4 Panzer divisions had been stopped by a single American infantry division that had arrived in the sector only 2 days earlier. The weapons that made the difference were not exotic or complex. They were M1 Garand rifles and Browning automatic rifles in the hands of National Guard infantrymen from the Carolinas and Tennessee who had learned how to use them effectively. The evolution of American infantry firepower that culminated at Mortain had begun more than 2 decades earlier, in the aftermath of World War I, when military theorists struggled to understand how infantry could attack successfully against entrenched defenders armed with machine guns. The Western Front had demonstrated that bolt-action rifles, regardless of how well-made or accurate, could not generate sufficient suppressive fire to allow attacking infantry to cross open ground under machine gun fire. Attackers needed either overwhelming artillery support to destroy defensive positions, or they needed infantry weapons that could deliver enough firepower to suppress defenders during the final assault. The United States Army had observed these lessons and concluded that every American infantryman needed a weapon that combined the accuracy of a rifle with a significantly increased rate of fire, The solution was a semi-automatic rifle that would eliminate the need to manually operate a bolt between shots. Development of such a weapon became a priority for the Army's Springfield Armory. In the 1920s, the technical challenge was substantial. A semi-automatic rifle needed to capture some of the energy from firing a round and use that energy to automatically eject the spent cartridge case, chamber a new round, and cock the firing mechanism, all while remaining reliable, accurate, and simple enough for mass production and field maintenance by minimally trained soldiers. Multiple designers submitted proposals throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. John Cantius Garand, a Canadian-American engineer working at Springfield Armory, developed a gas-operated system that tapped propellant gases from a port near the muzzle to drive an operating rod connected to a rotating bolt. When fired, gas pressure would push the operating rod backward, rotating the bolt to unlock it, extracting the spent case, compressing a spring, and cocking the hammer. The compressed spring would then drive the operating rod forward, chambering a new round and rotating the bolt back into the locked position, ready to fire again. All of this happened in a fraction of a second, automatically, every time the trigger was pulled. Garand's design used an 8-round en-bloc clip that was inserted into the rifle from the top, with the bolt locked open. The clip remained inside the rifle's receiver until all 8 rounds were fired, at which point it was automatically ejected with a distinctive metallic ping sound. This eliminated the need for a detachable box magazine that could be lost in combat, addressing concerns from Army ordnance officials who believed soldiers would misplace or damage external magazines. The design was elegant, mechanically sound, and after years of testing and refinement, was officially adopted by the U.S. Army in January 1936 as the rifle caliber .30 M1. Initial production was slow. Springfield Armory could manufacture only a few hundred rifles per month in the late 1930s, each requiring extensive machining and hand-fitting of components. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, most Army and Marine Corps units were still equipped with M1903 Springfield bolt-action rifles. The M1 Garand was in service, and production was ramping up, but there were not enough rifles to equip all units immediately. Priority for M1 distribution went to units that would see combat first. By late 1942, Winchester Repeating Arms had joined the production program, and by 1943, M1 Garands were being produced at a combined rate of more than 50,000 per month. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, virtually all Army infantry units in the European theatre of operations were equipped with M1 Garand as their standard rifle. The transformation of American infantry firepower was complete. But the M1 Garand alone was not sufficient to create the overwhelming squad firepower that German forces encountered at Mortain. The Browning automatic rifle was equally critical to American tactical effectiveness. The BAR had been designed during World War I by John Moses Browning, one of the most prolific firearms inventors in history. Browning's goal was to create a weapon that combined the portability of a rifle with the automatic fire capability of a machine gun, allowing infantry squads to have organic automatic weapons support without requiring the crew-served machine guns that were heavy and difficult to maneuver in trench warfare. The original M1918 BR had been issued in small numbers at the very end of World War I, too late to have significant impact on the fighting, but the U.S. Army recognized its potential and continued to develop the weapon throughout the interwar period. The M1918, a II variant adopted in 1940, incorporated modifications specifically designed for the squad automatic weapon role. These included a bipod for stability, a carrying handle for easier transport of the 20-pound weapon, and the selective rate of fire mechanism that allowed gunners to choose between 300 or 450 rounds per minute. The bar fired from an open bolt in automatic mode, meaning the bolt was held to the rear when the trigger was released, and released forward to chamber and fire a round when the trigger was pulled. This allowed air to circulate through the hot chamber between bursts, helping to cool the barrel. But unlike true machine guns, such as the M1919 or the German MG42, the BR had no quick-change barrel capability. Once the barrel became too hot from sustained firing, The weapon had to be allowed to cool, or it would lose accuracy and potentially damage internal components. This limitation meant bar gunners were trained to fire in short bursts rather than long continuous strings, which reduced the practical rate of fire but made the weapon more reliable over extended engagements. The combination of M1 Garands and bars created a squad-level firepower system that was revolutionary in its distribution of lethal capability. Previous American infantry squads built around the M1903 Springfield, and the bar had possessed one automatic weapon but limited rapid-fire capability from the riflemen. German infantry squads built around the MG-34 or MG-42 possessed devastating automatic fire from the machine gun but minimal rapid fire from the bolt-action rifles carried by the rest of the squad. The M1 Garand transformed every American rifleman into a significant firepower asset, capable of sustained semi-automatic fire that could suppress enemy positions or engage multiple targets rapidly. This distributed firepower had profound tactical implications. An American squad could split into multiple fire teams, each still capable of delivering substantial firepower independently. An American squad that took casualties still retained significant combat effectiveness as long as the riflemen survived, because each rifleman contributed meaningfully to the squad's total firepower, and an American squad could execute complex fire and maneuver tactics that required multiple elements to provide suppression simultaneously. At Mortain, these tactical advantages proved decisive. The Germans were not unprepared or untrained. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler and the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich were among the most experienced and capable armored formations in the German military. They had fought across Russia, Italy, and now France, defeating Soviet Guards divisions and British armored brigades. They were led by officers who understood combined arms tactics and who had repeatedly demonstrated their ability to break through enemy positions through aggressive maneuver and concentrated firepower. But at Mortain, they encountered American infantry who could deliver firepower that their tactical doctrine had not adequately prepared them to counter. The German approach to infantry combat emphasized the machine gun as the squad's primary weapon, with riflemen serving primarily to protect the gun crew and exploit openings the gun created. When American positions could maintain continuous fire from multiple M1 Garands, even while the bar was reloading or repositioning, German assault tactics broke down. SS troops who attempted to rush positions found themselves engaged by accurate semi-automatic fire from multiple directions, with no pauses in the incoming fire to exploit for their advance. Lieutenant Robert L. Weiss was a forward observer for the 230th Field Artillery Battalion, positioned on Hill 314 when the German attack began. At 23 years old, he was responsible for calling artillery fire on German positions from the most exposed observation point on the entire battlefield. His radio equipment and batteries were critical to the defense, allowing American artillery battalions miles behind the lines to deliver precision fire on German columns attempting to advance toward Avranches. Throughout August 7th and 8th, Weiss and his fellow forward observer, First Lieutenant Charles A. Bartz, directed continuous artillery missions against German armor and infantry concentrations visible from their commanding position. The view from Hill 314 extended for miles in multiple directions, making it possible to observe German movements that would have been invisible from ground-level positions. Every time German forces attempted to mass for an attack or move supplies forward, American artillery shells would rain down on their positions with devastating accuracy. The Germans understood immediately that Hill 314 had to be neutralized or captured if their offensive was to succeed. The 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division launched repeated assaults against the American positions throughout August 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. Each attack was met with coordinated defensive fire from M1 Garands, bars, mortars, and cold artillery. The volume of small arms fire coming from the surrounded American position forced German assault troops to ground repeatedly, preventing them from achieving the momentum necessary to overrun the defenders. German commanders who had successfully led assaults against Soviet positions on the Eastern Front found themselves unable to close with American defenders who could maintain continuous fire regardless of casualties or ammunition expenditure. On the afternoon of August 8th, First Lieutenant Ralph A. Curley, commanding Company E, 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry, received a message from German forces offering terms for surrender. The message suggested that the American position was hopeless, surrounded and cut off from resupply, and that further resistance would result in unnecessary casualties. Curley's response has been described by historians as short, to the point, and very unprintable. The surrounded Americans had no intention of surrendering while they still had ammunition and could inflict casualties on the attackers. The tactical mathematics favored defense, particularly from prepared positions on high ground, and the defenders understood that their mission was to delay the German advance as long as possible to allow American reinforcements to arrive and Allied air power to engage the exposed German armor columns. The supply situation on Hill 314 deteriorated rapidly over the first 3 days of the siege. The defenders had gone into position with standard combat loads of ammunition and rations, expecting to be part of a secure defensive line rather than a surrounded outpost. When German forces cut the roads into Mortain, the 700 Americans on the hill were isolated with minimal food, inadequate medical supplies, and ammunition stocks that were being consumed at alarming rates during each German assault. Attempts to resupply the position by air met with limited success. The wooded terrain and small size of the American perimeter made parachute drops extremely difficult. Supply bundles often fell outside the American lines into German-controlled areas, or were destroyed when they struck trees during descent. The defenders watched desperately needed supplies drift down into enemy hands, increasing the psychological pressure of their isolation. Lieutenant Colonel Louis D. Veeman, commander of the 230th Field Artillery Battalion, developed an innovative solution to the resupply problem. Artillery shells designed to deliver propaganda leaflets could be emptied of their paper cargo and repacked with medical supplies, radio batteries, and other small critical items. The shells could then be fired directly into the American perimeter on Hill 314. The physics of the solution were challenging. Artillery shells experienced tremendous acceleration forces when fired, compression that would destroy most contents. The medical bandages packed into the propaganda shells were compressed into solid blocks by the firing forces, and many shell casings ruptured on impact, scattering their contents. But enough supplies reached the defenders intact to make the effort worthwhile. Radio batteries allowing Weiss and Bartz to continue directing artillery fire were delivered via artillery shell. Small amounts of medical supplies reached the aid station where wounded Americans were being treated in a makeshift facility among the rocks. The innovation demonstrated the desperate, improvisational nature of the defense and the determination of supporting units to sustain the surrounded battalion. The weather on August 7th had started foggy, providing cover for the initial German assault, but by mid-morning, the fog had burned off, revealing clear skies perfect for Allied air operations. Fighter bombers from the United States 9th Air Force and Royal Air Force Typhoons arrived over the battlefield in waves throughout the day. The exposed German armor columns attempting to advance toward Avranches presented perfect targets for air attack. RAF Typhoons armed with 60-pound rockets devastated German tank formations. The rockets, fired from diving aircraft, could penetrate the armor of even heavy German tanks when they struck at the correct angle. More importantly, the psychological impact of rocket attacks forced German tank crews to button up their vehicles or abandon them entirely, disrupting the coordination necessary for effective armored operations. American P-47 Thunderbolts, carrying 500-pound bombs and 50-caliber machine guns, strafed German infantry concentrations and supply columns. The fighter bombers operated with near impunity, as the Luftwaffe had been unable to provide adequate air cover for Operation Lüttich, despite Hitler's directive that 1,000 German fighters be committed to the offensive. German forces attempting to move during daylight were subjected to continuous air attack that inflicted heavy casualties and prevented the kind of rapid maneuver necessary for the offensive to succeed. By August 10th, the German offensive had completely stalled. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, and 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich had suffered heavy casualties without achieving their objective of reaching Avranches. The 2nd Panzer Division and 116th Panzer Division on the northern flank of the attack had penetrated several miles into American lines, but had been stopped by the 35th Infantry Division and elements of the 3rd Armored Division. The concentration of German armor at the western end of the front in Normandy created a strategic vulnerability that American commanders were quick to exploit. While German forces were focused on the attack toward Avranches, American forces to the south and east continued their advance, threatening to encircle the German units committed to Operation Lüttich. On August 12th, at approximately noon, elements of the 119th Infantry Regiment broke through German lines and reached the defenders on Hill 314. The relief force found conditions on the hill shocking. Of the approximately 700 American soldiers who had held the position for 6 days, over 300 had been killed or wounded. The survivors were gaunt from lack of food, many suffering from untreated wounds or dehydration. Bodies of American dead were stacked in a makeshift morgue among the rocks, having been searched for ammunition and rations before being placed there. The living defenders had the appearance of men who had endured far longer than 6 days of combat, their eyes hollow from exhaustion and constant vigilance, but they had accomplished their mission. The German offensive had been stopped, and the concentration of German armor at Mortain had created the conditions for a decisive American counterattack that would trap much of the German 7th Army in what would become known as the Falaise Pocket. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The tactical lessons from Mortain were absorbed immediately by both German and American forces. German after-action reports from the battle consistently mentioned the unexpected volume of fire from American infantry positions. Officers who had fought on the Eastern Front described American small arms fire as heavier than comparable Soviet positions, despite the Americans typically having fewer troops. The distributed firepower created by the M1 Garand meant that American defensive positions could maintain continuous fire even when individual soldiers were killed or wounded, something that was not possible with German squads that concentrated their firepower in a single machine gun. German intelligence officers who examined captured American weapons during and after the Mortain battle filed reports describing the M1 Garand's capabilities in detail. Some German soldiers who encountered the rifle expressed a desire to acquire them for personal use, recognizing the tactical advantages the semi-automatic action provided. But large-scale German efforts to use captured American weapons were limited by logistics. The M1 Garand fired .30-06 Springfield ammunition, which was not compatible with German logistics systems. A German soldier carrying a captured M1 would need access to American ammunition supplies, making the weapon impractical for sustained use. More significantly, German military industry attempted to respond to the firepower advantage American forces had demonstrated. The Gewehr 41, a German semi-automatic rifle, had been in limited production since 1941, but suffered from reliability problems and complex manufacturing requirements that made mass production impossible. Later in the war, Germany would develop the Sturmgewehr 44, the world's first assault rifle, which combined semi-automatic and automatic fire capability with an intermediate cartridge less powerful than full rifle ammunition. But the STG-44 came too late and in too few numbers to affect the outcome of the war. By the time German forces had weapons that could match American infantry firepower, Germany had already lost the industrial capacity to produce them in sufficient quantities. American tactical doctrine evolved based on the Mortain experience as well. The demonstration that infantry armed with M1 Garands and bars could hold against elite armored divisions in defensive positions reinforced the importance of ensuring all frontline units were fully equipped with the best weapons available. Requests for M1 Garands from units still carrying M1903 Springfield rifles were given higher priority. The BR, which some American officers had considered replacing with belt-fed light machine guns similar to German designs, was retained and production was increased. The squad organization, built around 8 M1 Garands and 1 or 2 bars, became the standard that American infantry would use for the remainder of the war and into the Korean War. The psychological impact on German forces was perhaps more significant than the tactical lessons. Elite SS divisions that had considered themselves invincible after years of victories on the Eastern Front had been stopped by National Guard infantry who had been in combat for only 2 months. The firepower advantage that American infantry possessed forced German commanders to reconsider their assumptions about the relative combat effectiveness of German versus American troops. In previous engagements, German forces had often relied on superior training and experience to compensate for material disadvantages. At Mortain, superior American equipment had proven decisive despite German advantages in tactical experience. Captain Reynold C. Erickson received the Distinguished Service Cross for his leadership during the defense of Hill 314. Company commanders Captain Delmont K. Byrne, First Lieutenant Ralph A. Curley, First Lieutenant Joseph C. Reeser, and First Lieutenant Ronald E. Woody Jr. also received the Distinguished Service Cross. The 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment, received the Presidential Unit Citation, one of the highest unit awards in the American military. On March 17, 2020, President Donald Trump announced that the entire 30th Infantry Division would receive the Presidential Unit Citation in recognition of its heroic stand at Mortain. The announcement stated that this action rightfully recognizes our veterans who triumphed against incredible odds, as well as those who died during a critical battle that helped ensure the Allied victory in Europe. The Germans referred to the 30th Infantry Division as Roosevelt's SS, a nickname that reflected German respect for the division's combat effectiveness. For a German military that had organized its most elite combat formations into SS divisions, comparing an American National Guard unit to the SS was the highest compliment German forces could offer. The nickname acknowledged that the 30th Division fought with a skill and determination that matched Germany's best units, and that American infantry equipped with superior weapons could defeat German elite formations in direct combat. The failure at Mortain had strategic consequences far beyond the immediate tactical defeat. Adolf Hitler's insistence on concentrating German armor for a counter-offensive that had minimal chance of success left those armored divisions exposed when American forces to the south continued their advance. By mid-August, American and British forces were executing a pincer movement designed to encircle German forces in Normandy. The Falaise Pocket became a killing ground where tens of thousands of German soldiers were killed or captured, and where hundreds of tanks and thousands of vehicles were destroyed. The concentration of German armor at Mortain made the encirclement possible and ensured that when the pocket closed, Germany lost much of its armored strength in France. The road to Paris was open. By August 25, 1944, Paris was liberated. By September, Allied forces had reached the German border. The Normandy campaign that had begun with the D-Day landings on June 6 had achieved its strategic objectives, destroying German forces in France and creating the conditions for the final drive into Germany. The defense of Hill 314, fought by 700 American infantrymen with M1 Garands and bars, had played a measurable role in that strategic success. The weapons that made the difference were not secret or exotic. They were standard-issue infantry rifles that had been in production since 1936 and squad automatic weapons that had been designed during World War I. But those weapons, in the hands of well-trained soldiers fighting from good defensive positions, generated firepower that German forces could not overcome. The tactical mathematics were simple. 240 rounds per minute per squad from distributed weapons systems created defensive firepower that elite German assault troops could not penetrate. That firepower advantage, multiplied across battalions and divisions, transformed the tactical balance of the European theater. The German soldiers who faced American infantry at Mortain in August 1944 were among the most experienced and capable troops in the German military. Many were veterans of years of combat on the Eastern Front, where they had defeated Soviet armies and captured vast territories. They were led by officers who understood combined arms tactics and who had repeatedly demonstrated their ability to execute complex operations under difficult conditions. They were equipped with excellent weapons, including the MG-42 machine gun that many military historians consider the best squad automatic weapon of World War II. But experience, leadership, and excellent machine guns were not sufficient to overcome the firepower advantage that American infantry possessed through their standard-issue rifles. When every American rifleman could fire 40 to 50 rounds per minute of accurate .30-06 ammunition, and when that fire could be sustained throughout an engagement without long pauses for reloading or bolt operation, German assault tactics that had worked successfully against Soviet forces failed. The distributed firepower model that the M1 Garand enabled meant that American squads could not be silenced by eliminating a single crew-served weapon. If the bar gunner was killed, 8 riflemen with Garands could continue to deliver substantial fire. If half the squad became casualties, the survivors still represented significant combat power. This resilience in the face of casualties was fundamentally different from German squads organized around a single machine gun, where the loss of the gun crew catastrophically reduced the squad's combat effectiveness. The engineering that made this possible was elegant in its simplicity. John Garand's gas-operated action, refined over nearly 2 decades of development, captured a small amount of propellant gas from each shot and used that energy to automatically cycle the action. The process happened in a fraction of a second, requiring no conscious effort from the shooter beyond pulling the trigger again. The N-block clip system allowed fast reloading while keeping the magazine internal and protected. The rifle was robust enough to function reliably in mud, sand, extreme heat, and extreme cold, with minimal maintenance. These were not revolutionary concepts. Semi-automatic rifles had existed for decades before the M1 Garand entered service, but Garand's design was the first to combine reliability, accuracy, ease of manufacture, and soldier-proof simplicity in a package that could be mass-produced and issued to every infantryman in the army. The approximately 5.4 million M1 Garands produced during World War II represented an industrial achievement as significant as the technical achievement of the rifle's design. Springfield Armory and Winchester, repeating arms manufactured rifles to tolerances that ensured interchangeability of parts between rifles built months or years apart in different factories. Workers who had been farmers or shopkeepers before the war were trained to machine receiver forgings and manufacture bolt assemblies to specifications that required precision measurement. The supply chain that delivered steel, wood, and components to the factories represented a triumph of industrial organization. The M1 Garand was a weapon that could only have been produced by a fully industrialized nation with vast resources and advanced manufacturing capabilities. Germany, despite its reputation for engineering excellence, never achieved comparable semi-automatic rifle production. The Gewehr 41 and later the Gewehr 43 were manufactured in small numbers, but never replaced the Kar 98K as the standard German rifle. German industry was operating at maximum capacity, producing the weapons it already had in production, and lacked the resources to completely retool for new designs. More critically, the decentralized nature of German weapons production, with multiple contractors manufacturing components to varying standards, made it difficult to achieve the kind of interchangeable mass production that American industry had perfected. The Soviet Union produced semi-automatic rifles in larger numbers than Germany, with the SVT-40 being issued to specialized troops. Soviet production was focused primarily on submachine guns like the PPSH-41 for close-range combat and bolt-action Mosin-Nagant rifles for longer-range engagements. The Soviets never achieved universal distribution of semi-automatic rifles to all infantry. Japan attempted to develop a semi-automatic rifle even later than Germany, with the Type 4 rifle entering production only in early 1945. Only approximately 250 Type 4 rifles were manufactured before Japan surrendered, and none saw combat. The rifles were discovered by American occupation forces at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in September 1945. American weapons experts who examined them recognized the design as a derivative of the M1 Garand, modified to use Japanese ammunition and a fixed 10-round magazine fed by stripper clips rather than en bloc clips. The Type 4 represented an acknowledgement by Japanese military planners that the firepower advantage American infantry possessed through their semi-automatic rifles was decisive, but that acknowledgement came far too late to affect the outcome of the Pacific War. By the time the Mortain battle ended on August 12, 1944, the strategic outcome of World War II in Europe was no longer in doubt. Germany had lost the initiative permanently and would spend the remainder of the war in retreat. But individual battles still mattered. The defense of Hill 314 prevented German forces from achieving their operational objective, which, in turn, created conditions for the encirclement of German forces in the Falaise pocket. Thousands of American lives were saved because German forces were defeated in Normandy, rather than being allowed to retreat intact to defend along the Rhine River. The weapons that enabled that victory were carried by soldiers like the men of the 30th Infantry Division, National Guardsmen from the Carolinas and Tennessee, who had trained with their M1 Garands until the semi-automatic operation became instinctive. They understood that in combat, the difference between 40 rounds per minute and 15 rounds per minute could mean the difference between stopping an attack and being overrun. They trusted their weapons because their weapons had proven trustworthy in 2 months of continuous combat, and when German forces attacked at Mortain, those soldiers demonstrated that training, weapons, and determination could defeat experience, tactical sophistication, and numerical superiority. The quiet that settled over Hill 314 on August 12, 1944, after 6 days of continuous combat, was the quiet of exhaustion and relief. The approximately 376 survivors who were relieved that day would carry the memory of those 6 days for the rest of their lives. Many would never speak of what they had experienced, finding the memories too difficult to articulate or too painful to share. Others would tell their stories to family members or historians, preserving the details of a battle that demonstrated fundamental truths about infantry combat. The SS troops who attacked at Mortain and were repelled had believed they were facing an enemy inferior to the Soviet forces they had defeated on the Eastern Front. They discovered instead that American infantry, properly equipped and positioned, could deliver firepower that their assault tactics could not overcome. The shock of that discovery was captured in German reports that described American defensive fire as unexpectedly heavy and American positions as far more difficult to overrun than anticipated. The mathematical reality of 240 rounds per minute per American squad had collided with German expectations, and the mathematics had won. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.